can't help but wonder if we ever stood a chance. Or if we were doomed as soon as we spent our first night there. It had been my half-brother Seth's house, in life, and in death he left it to me. Seth himself had been unexpectedly willed the fixer-upper in that tiny town we'd never heard of before, by some estranged relative on his dad's side. Frankly, when the lawyer called me to inform me that I'd inherited the place, I was surprised. Seth had been so excited at first, but eventually seemed to sour on the house. In those last weeks, he kept mentioning how he was going to leave and never come back, as soon as he got better. But that never happened. I hadn't been a fan of the house myself either, even before it became the backdrop to Seth's illness. The place I visited him as he lay withering away. It seemed like every time I walked in, it had undergone some new, strange modification. After what had started as renovations, the old Victorian began to take on an edge of frenzied insanity. He'd nailed random doors shut, and I'd caught glimpses of dangling cans and wind chimes hanging low from the ceiling in various rooms. But the house, for all its bad memories, gave my son Ben and I an opportunity for stability. It meant we could start over somewhere new, in a small town that felt safe. Seth had installed a video doorbell and a security system. He'd become withdrawn and paranoid in his final days. I suppose in some way, I also hoped it would help me feel closer to my late brother. There hadn't been much left of him by the time we lost him. The house where he had spent his final days was at least something tangible. So I made the drive out, sat in the cramped office of the town lawyer to review the paperwork. Something about the experience unnerved me. His gaunt, looming form, the way he smiled with all those small, perfect teeth when he asked if I accepted the gift, and as I signed my name. I tried to make the house look more normal, taking down some of the odd things that my brother had left behind before Ben saw them. I wasn't quite ready to explain to my 6-year-old how Uncle Seth had become sick in the mind as well as the body. By the end of the first few days there, I found myself questioning the decision to move in. The disturbing aura of the place felt even stronger without my brother there. Almost as if, with the original subject of its focus gone, an intense attention had been shifted to me. There was a coldness, too. Like the domicile equivalent of a smile that never quite reached the eyes. There wasn't any one reason, but several that added up to congeal into a heavy sense of dread. Such as how, despite the bright yellow paint, despite the abundance of windows, it always felt grim during the day. Almost as if the sun's rays were hesitant to enter the place. The symphony of disconcerting sounds day and night didn't help either. The screech of branches on glass window panes, the shuffling in the attic, the sad sighs of the house settling, a sharp contrast to the eerie silence outside. It made sense that there was no road noise. We were so far away from anything even resembling a highway. But despite us being so close to the woods, there was no birdsong, no chittering of squirrels. It was just us and the house, and whatever was moving around in the attic. The source of the muted thuds and scratching we'd hear mainly at night. I'd guess there was some sort of rodent up there, escaping the cold, misty weather. I procrastinated investigating it at first, hoping it would go away on its own. People in town were friendly enough, though they all had that same sort of sickly look that Seth did towards the end. I made a mental note to test the water from the sink and only drink it bottled. There didn't seem to be many kids around, so I couldn't help but wonder how small Ben's class would be once school started back up. A few times I thought I saw Seth in town too, at the corners of my vision, the next aisle over at the grocery store. Always pale, fleeting images of him, at his worst. Not the way he looked in health. I knew it couldn't be him, though. I'd been the one to call for a wellness check after a day and a half of not being able to get a hold of him. I'd been there when they lowered him into the ground. I tried to make the house feel more like a home as I unpacked our things. But after a while, I started to feel exhausted all the time. Ben was the one to find the mark on the back of my neck one morning when I was prepping breakfast. It was in a location I'd never have noticed it myself without some creative mirror placement. It almost resembled a bite mark, albeit from something with far too many small, needly teeth. Reluctantly, after making sure Ben was okay, thankfully he didn't have any marks on him, I decided it was time to see what was in the attic. It was surprisingly cobweb and dust-free up there. A crowded maze of boxes that it seemed Seth and several prior owners had never unpacked. A sour smell hung in the air, growing stronger the further I wandered in. I found myself wishing for a flashlight, as the piles of boxes began to obscure the light from the small overhead bulb. I just managed to convince myself there was nothing up there when I found it. In the far corner, one draped in heavy shadow, there were bits of twigs, fabric, trash, hair interwoven, with other bits strewn about nearby. I had immediately grabbed cleaning supplies and had begun to sweep the bits into a garbage bag, but I paused when I found pieces of something pale that looked dried, leathery. I nudged them with my foot, revealing a few small pebbles underneath, which gleamed even in the dull light. It took a moment of closer study to realize what they were. Teeth. I immediately called pest control. Something was living up there. Something I had a nagging feeling I wouldn't be able to deal with on my own. And I wanted it gone. The pest guys came out the next morning. Both of them had that ill, lost too much weight too fast look, their skin seeming to sag from their faces. They looked around for a while I sat downstairs with Ben. After a while, they called me up to the attic to show me what they found. Nothing. They'd found nothing. I walked them pointedly to the back corner, but the pile of twigs and trash was gone. After officially declaring the source of the strange sounds as probably squirrels, they left, leaving me feeling even worse than before. I seem to have picked up some sort of bug, too. That, plus the stress of trying to make the house livable for my son and I, while also trying to sleep through the very obvious sounds of the probably squirrels in the attic, began to eat at me. I started dropping weight, and my home improvement project sat unfinished. Just keeping Ben and I fed and functioning felt like a monumental effort. I saw the town doctor, who said he couldn't even see the bite marks I insisted were not only there, but had multiplied. He took blood, but claimed all the test results were normal, cheerfully chalking it up to stress. A few weeks later, after biting into an apple, I felt a strange sensation, followed by a dull throb. Ben pointed at me. "You lost your tooth, too." I looked down at it embedded in the apple, horrified. Ben had just lost one of his first baby teeth before we moved in, and it had taken a while to convince him that such things were perfectly normal, a part of growing up. So I tried not to alarm him as I stared at the tooth that had come out bloodlessly, root and all. "Are you going to leave it under your pillow?" he asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Sure, buddy," I said absent-mindedly. He watched me that night, advising on the optimal placement of the tooth in relation to the pillow. That did make me smile a bit, albeit a gap-toothed one. I tucked him in, and afterwards I was so exhausted that I just left it under there. I woke up a few hours later, to the feeling of the pillow lifting up slightly, the sound of a hand sliding underneath it. It seemed Ben had already figured out that I was the tooth fairy, and was now returning the favor with some of his allowance. "You gonna leave me $50, right?" I whispered with a grin, still not opening my eyes. To account for inflation? The hand froze for a moment before it withdrew from under the pillow and stroked my hair, my cheek. At the feel of the fingertips running across my skin, my eyes jolted open. They were cold, bony to the point that it was painful as they scraped along my flesh. I squinted at the figure hovering above me. In the darkness, without my glasses, it was difficult to make them out. But even then, I could tell it wasn't Ben. With my blurred vision in my half-awake state, I could have almost sworn it was my brother Seth, but it was too dark to tell. All I could say for sure was that the person who'd invaded the privacy of my room was tall, thin, and that I felt the weight of their stare. Eyes shadowed yet glistening in the scant moonlight. On me. Before I could even scream, the intruder was gone. I raced to Ben's room, relieved to find him still in bed, safe. I called the police, pacing nervously while I waited for them to arrive. An officer came out and took a statement. I left out the bit about the tooth. I felt like it made me sound crazy. And I gave him my phone number. But when he had me pull up the footage from my video doorbell, which showed absolutely nothing, and confirmed that the security system hadn't been triggered, well, he seemed disinterested at best. He muttered something about realistic nightmares. On his way out, I could have sworn he glanced up at the ceiling with the faintest hint of a smile. On a whim, I checked under my pillow. The tooth was gone. When I used to watch horror movies, back before my life became one, I would shout at the screen when the characters experienced crazy shit in their homes and still stayed put. But when it happened to me, I felt a sort of kinship with those fictional folks. Moving wasn't just a colossal pain in the ass. It was expensive. It had drained most of my savings just moving Ben and I's meager belongings to this place. We had no one else to stay with. Not even for a brief couch surfing session. After a day, the police closed my case, insistent that it had been some figment of my imagination, a nightmare produced by an overstressed mind. And the strange thing is, the longer we stayed at the house, the more true that felt. I was overreacting, I began to realize. Anxiety fading into a sense of complacency. There was nothing in the attic. I was perfectly healthy. No one had entered my home. Everything was fine. What eventually snapped me out of that stupor was my son. One morning, he studied me from across the kitchen table. "I don't like it here, Mom," he whispered. "I'm scared for you." It was the expression on his face. That kind of look kids have when they are forced to be wise beyond their years. That brought me back to my senses. I limped over to the mirror, and for the first time in months, I saw myself. Really saw myself. I looked twice my age. Gaunt, patches of hair missing. I grimaced as my tongue wandered across my gums, and I counted at least 4 teeth missing. I was determined that I wouldn't let people in town gaslight me again. I would make this house safe for us. Livable. At least until we had some other options. That night, instead of being dismissive, I was pissed the hell off when I heard those familiar sounds in the attic. Sure, I was no expert, but I knew the difference between the sound of squirrels and something far heavier moving around up there. I climbed up the rickety ladder, flashlight between my remaining teeth, bat in hand. Ben was in his room, and his door was locked, and I'd instructed him to call 911 and ask to be connected to police the town over if I didn't make it back down. The protest of the flimsy ladder as I climbed nearly masked how the shuffling above me abruptly gave way to silence. It was humid up there, far warmer than a drafty attic should be in late fall. The sour odor had intensified, and underneath it, the faint, musty smell that lingers after the usual reek of decay has faded away. I felt eyes on me, and I had the sick, fleeting feeling that they were the same ones I'd felt in my room before. I heard something move in the darkness around me, but by the time I managed to pull the string for the light and sweep my flashlight beam in that direction, there was nothing there. Somewhere beyond where the light could reach, the rhythmic sound of slow breathing became apparent. I followed it, despite every ounce of common sense within me warning me that I shouldn't. My determination to find whatever was plaguing us, and then beating the shit out of it, was stronger. I hefted the bat over my shoulder and continued on. Of course, it was in that same damn corner where I'd first found the odd pile of trash the first weeks after moving in. Even in the shadows cast by the pile of boxes, it was obvious what I was looking at. Another nest. A fresh one. It was huge. More suited to the size of a full-grown human than any animal. The bits of twigs and leaves had other items from around the house woven in. Pieces of string, a chain from a necklace that I thought I'd misplaced. My hair. My missing teeth were placed in front of it, fanned out as if they were some sort of offering. Inside lay a shivering mass, perfectly smooth and oblong, leathery, pale. It shook abruptly, as if stirred by my presence. What looked like limbs became outlined in relief against the fleshy, opaque membrane covering them. If I weren't frozen in surprise and confusion, I would have wondered where the source of the movement I'd heard as I'd been descending the ladder up here, the source of the unseen glare, had gone. Or, perhaps, I'd have had the sense to swing the bat down on the squirming thing in the nest before it escaped its fleshy encasement. But no. I stared at it, shocked, appalled, like an idiot. And then it began to emerge. Pale, long, impossibly thin fingers poked through, sharply opening the leathery sheath covering it, as if parting living curtains, with a sickening, squelchy tear. What snapped me back to my senses was when I saw its face. Because, holy fuck, it was me. An awful, wrong version of me. Like a factory reject, assembled in the dark based on a fading memory. With its sagging flesh hanging from sharply angled limbs, a face too symmetrical for comfort. It shook free from the remnants of the fleshy casing and reared its head. My head. I was already running as it stood, nearly my height, yet barely half my weight. As I skidded to a stop near the top of the ladder, I slammed into a column of boxes, knocking them over and blocking the way behind me. Something let out a shriek. Sheer luck led to the boxes toppling over onto the other creature I hadn't yet seen. I instinctively shined a light at it, only to see that it was some sort of sick facsimile of my brother. Many teeth bared, hissing at me. I shouted down for Ben, ordering him to head to the car. When I caught up to him in the hall, I scooped him up, running the rest of the way. We left the house behind, along with everything we owned. We didn't have time to grab anything. I told myself that one day I could pay for movers to come back for our things. The doctor from that town called me several times, insisting I needed to come back for more tests. The lawyer left vague messages about paperwork. The officer that had taken my story asked for my new address so he could come provide updates on my case. Yeah, no. Every time I thought of that town, that house, I pictured the thing emerging from the nest in the attic. recalled the adrenaline-drenched moments of the not Seth and the newly hatched copy of me, chasing our car until we gathered enough speed to lose them. Eventually, they stopped calling, and Ben and I found a rental house I'd managed to afford. We did eventually get our stuff delivered after a quiet couple of months. I really thought we were going to be okay. Even though I hadn't yet fully recovered, I figured I would eventually. We were going to be fine. I'd really managed to convince myself of that, until I went to do a load of laundry in the basement, and found a large, unmarked box. One that hadn't been there when we first rented the place. It looked to have been partially chewed through. I opened it with shaking hands, only to find that it was empty. Well, empty save for the bits of twigs and hair, and not yet dry strips of fleshy casing.
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.